What's up, you guys? It's Greg. So let's talk about why you shouldn't be buying a house in 2021. Just as a little bit of background knowledge on myself, just in case you're not aware, I'm a real estate investor. We flipped our first house, bought and renovated a foreclosure that we currently live in, and bought a rental property that when the refinance is complete, we will have bought that property for $0, including renovation. So I just wanted to get that out of the way so that you can know that I am up on what's going on in the economy and currently know what's going on in the housing market. So now, if you're watching this video, you probably know what's going on too. Housing prices are ridiculous. So let's talk a little bit about that. So there's a handful of factors that contribute into that, and mainly it all boils down to supply and demand. Honestly, there's just not enough houses on the market to satisfy the demand. So one of the factors is the eviction moratorium, which means that people aren't being able to be evicted from their houses. And the next would be mortgage forbearance, which again is helping houses not to go into foreclosure, which is great so that people don't lose their houses. I'm not saying that I want people to lose their houses. That's, very tragic and not something that I wish upon anybody, but it's limiting the amount of foreclosures and short sales that have to happen, so therefore decreasing the supply of houses available on the market. Next, we have interest rates. So when the Federal Reserve lowers rates by 1%, typically that means that the home price will go up by about $10,000, because when you have a buyer looking at what they can afford just on a monthly basis, not at the total home price. So they're not necessarily looking at the fact that the home's $160,000, $170,000. They're looking at what they can afford monthly. But because interest rates are lower, meaning you're paying less interest to the bank, you can actually afford to give more money up front to the seller because your payment will stay the same. This isn't affecting the supply in the market, but this is impacting the price of the market because, let's be honest, the buyers set the pricing in the market. It's not the sellers. So the buyers are willing to determine what they will pay for a house, just like you're determining what you will pay for the rent of your current apartment or house. Or, if you're renting, you and the people in that community have set the price of that rent, because you have determined that you will pay this amount for that product. So sellers know when they go to sell their house, there's not a lot of houses on the market and the buyers can afford to pay more, so I'm going to jack the price up. And then you have buyers coming in and willing to pay that, therefore elevating the house prices. And then next you have a supply chain issue, which is the inflated costs of lumber right now. So it costs more to build a new construction than it would have, a year or two ago. So this actually decreases the supply of new houses coming to market. But then also when they do come to market, they're X amount more than they originally would have been. So therefore the price is even higher. And the high prices in 2021 shouldn't necessarily scare you if you're planning to buy a house and stay in it for, let's say, 10, 15 years, because that lower interest rate will actually help you because you're paying less interest to the bank than you would have normally. And thankfully for us that are in not as desirable locations, like I live in upstate New York, we're not getting a ton of influx of people. But if you're in Tennessee or Texas, Nevada, Florida, you're getting massive influx of people from California and Illinois and those really high, and New York, in these really high tax states that are going to your no state income tax, lower property tax states, and driving up the prices of your home. So let's say, for example, a couple is coming from California, they have a $1 million home. Let's say they just have a cheap home in California. They have about $1 million home, they're coming from LA, and they move to Texas. Well, for $1 million in Texas, you can get a lot of house. Or you can take a normal house that's, $400,000, $500,000, offer $100,000 over asking, and cut out every single Texas buyer, because to them, they're getting a good deal because they're saving on state income tax. They're taking equity from their house that they've sold in California that's worth $1 million. They're getting a bigger home in a no income state tax. So therefore, they're saving money, even though it screws the native Texans out of houses. So just to sum up, the market's inflated everywhere. Where I currently am in upstate New York, we're only probably about $25,000, $30,000 over what the actual price should be, but it's much better than you're seeing in Texas, Florida, and DC. So if you live in a more rural community, it might not actually be impacting you that much. I would be diligent about following the Federal Reserve and what they're going to do with the interest rates, because when interest rates start bumping, housing prices will come down. As of right now, I think they're set to revisit the topic in September or October. So I'd like to see where we end up right around there. But keep in mind, with all that said, if you're going to buy a property and stay in it for 10, 15 years, it's still okay, even though we are in a bubble, because you can get that lower interest rate. So if you're going to put down roots for your family, you're going to buy a property as an investment, buy it as an investment and you get a good deal, a good wedge deal, under market value. Do some renovations and either flip it or rent it, and you still have a lower interest rate. So I'm going to go ahead and run through a couple of facts you may not be aware of. Then after that, I'll actually give you some tips on, if you decide you do want to buy in 2021, or kind of the steps to take from here. If you made it this far, YouTube's telling me quite a few of you aren't subscribed to the channel, so it'd be really cool if you'd hit that like button for the algorithm. That'd really help push this video. Also, if you want to hit the subscribe button, that'd be really cool too. So if right now you're watching this video and you're just getting frustrated with the housing prices and you just can't afford to buy a house because you can't afford the down payment, you don't want to pay a ton of money extra, because let's be honest, nobody wants the housing prices to go up and up and up and up and up, and then finally you get a house all the way at the top. That was me grabbing the house all the way at the top of the market. And then the prices start to fall. Let's say the bubble bursts, interest rates rise, the eviction moratorium expires, houses start hitting foreclosure, and houses prices plummet, kind of back to where they normally were. So like, let's say you buy a house for $180,000, that house drops back to $150,000, $140,000. And you go to move in 3 years. Nobody's going to pay you $180,000 for that house because you paid $180,000 for that house in 2021. They're going to pay you what the market value is at that given time, which would be about, $150,000. Now keep in mind, there's selling fees, things like that we're not talking about in this analogy. So basically, you're out $30,000, even though you got a better interest rate by buying in 2021. So if you are going to buy in 2021, make sure that you're planning to stay in that property for an extended period of time, or you're buying it as a good investment where you're buying it below market value, meaning that house right now it's selling for 180. You can go ahead and get it for, 120 or something like that. Put a little bit of renovation into it. That way, there's a little bit of cushion, even though, you're not coming to it from an investment standpoint or something like that. So I think it's important to remember that buying a house isn't really cheaper than renting. I know that people only look at, I'm going to pay X amount for rent, I'm going to pay X amount for mortgage, and typically that mortgage payment's lower than you'd pay for rent. But also when it comes to owning a house, you have principal, interest, taxes, insurance, which are a whole bunch of other costs that you don't have when you're renting. And then you also have repairs, maintenance, like just typical maintenance, and like getting your HVAC system serviced. But God forbid your water heater goes out or your HVAC system goes out. When you're renting, those are costs that are transferred to the landlord and they have to pay for them. But when you're a homeowner, you have to pay for them. You have roofs, HVAC systems, water heaters, plumbing, electrical, like so much. Not only the cosmetics, like the kitchen and the bathroom and things like that, you're paying for. So if right now you're renting and you're just itching to get out, just remember, it's not necessarily cheaper to own a home. And to top it all off, it's not even worth selling in 2021 unless it's a secondary property or an investment or a flip or something like that, because there's nowhere for you to go and move. Like, you're just going to end up moving laterally as opposed to moving up. You're not going to be able to sell your house for an extra $50,000 of equity that you would have basically just accumulated since the pandemic started, to now you're just going to give that extra $50,000 to someone else that is moving, because you still have to have a property to move into. So best case scenario from that circumstance, you'd sell your house, move into an apartment or a family member's house or another house that you've bought basically pre-pandemic or severely under market value and did a lot of renovations to it. Other than that, it's basically a lateral movement, which again is hurting the supply of the housing market. So let's do a little recap. If you're renting, it's not necessarily cheaper to buy a home, even though if you just look at the mortgage, it does look like it will be cheaper. If you are going to buy a house in 2021, make sure you're planning to either buy it as an investment property, meaning you're going to buy it as a rental or buy it as a flip property, or you buy it under market value and then you add equity by renovating the property, or you just go ahead and buy the property at the inflated 2021 price and you plan to stay in that property 10, 15 years to make sure that you can take full advantage of your interest rate, and that way you can ride out any fluctuations in the market. Because even if the market goes like this and it goes up and up and up with the pandemic and then goes down after the bubble bursts, it will eventually start to climb again, because as a general rule, real estate does increase in value over time. But just like the stock market, there are fluctuations in the market. And one way that you can always hedge against fluctuations in the market is buying a below market value deal or a wedge deal. So basically something that's under market value, you do a new bathroom, new kitchen, new carpet, paint, things like that, and increase the value of the property. That allows you to have more equity built up, and you have spent less on that property and spent a little bit of time renovating, and that way you can ride out the ups and downs of the market, and that kind of gives you the opportunity to sell whenever you would like. So to sum up, if you haven't been able to find a house in 2021, it's okay. Eventually the market will burst. I'm really interested to see what September, October, November is going to bring with the expiring eviction moratorium, as well as the Feds talking about raising rates, which and therefore would decrease the pricing of houses. So just sit tight, ride out the market, everything will be okay. Eventually the bubble will burst, so if you can't afford it now, you'll be able to afford it later. If you made it this far and want to know what I'm doing, I am looking for properties that I can flip currently. But I'm not basing my numbers off pandemic numbers. I'm basing my numbers off previous numbers, meaning that if a typical house, I would say after flip, would sell for $120,000, $130,000, I'm buying it and renovating it like it's a $120,000, $130,000 house. That's how I'm hedging against the bubble. Because if I was going to go ahead and buy those houses like they were pandemic numbers and I could say that I could list $150,000, $160,000, I'm probably going to end up overpaying and overspending on that property. So I'm planning on paying less for the property, doing a good renovation, and then selling that property or listing it for, somewhere around 120, 130. And then I'll probably get offers over market value, but that's how I'm hedging against the bubble popping before the house actually gets flipped. Because if I buy it knowing that, oh, the value of this house could go down by $20,000, $30,000, that way I'm still insulated from that and still have a profit to make. Thanks for sticking around and watching this video. Hopefully it was informative and was able to give you a little bit of background on what's going on in the real estate market, and hopefully was able to help you formulate a better plan for you and your family. If you have any ideas on video topics you'd like to hear me talk about, go ahead and comment those down below. But anyways, I'll catch you next video.